Welcome to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have an amazing show for you today. We're going to kick it off talking about Microsoft's Azure Sphere, a new security product for the IoT. We're also going to be talking about new security standards for the enterprise from the Online Trust Alliance. We're also going to talk about a couple possible acquisitions, new details on what your August locks can talk to. Twilio has introduced a new IoT product. We've got a crazy idea in transporting small pets. Kevin's going to review and talk about the Fabaro HomeKit sensors. And our guest this week is Galen Hunt, who is actually the mastermind behind Azure Sphere. So we're going to get a lot of detail on that. Plus, we've got a message from our sponsor, Fortra. And now we'll hear a message from one of our other sponsors. This week's sponsor is Unomi, the Unomi platform. From the makers of the free Unomi app, the Unomi platform is a cloud-based platform as a service for companies building solutions for the connected home. Unomi's offerings include ThinCloud, a serverless IoT platform for device manufacturers looking to get their products to market quickly and securely. And also Unomi One, a powerful integration engine that connects to more than 100 top smart home devices. This week on the Stacey on IoT podcast, the Unomi platform is wrapping up their 5-part series, What the Next Billion-Dollar Smart Home Startup Will Look Like. You can find Part 4 and Part 5 today by visiting platform.unomi.co/Stacey on IoT. Okay, Kevin, let's get this party started with Microsoft Azure Sphere.
Yeah, it's going to be funny to talk about Microsoft and not talk about Windows.
Yes, so everyone was very excited about this. Probably the most common headline I saw was, Microsoft is using a Linux kernel. Ah! They didn't make the opera noise, but...
Yeah, I doubt they did that. But,
that was implied.
Yeah, they've actually done a good chunk of work on bringing Linux to Windows desktops recently, which is great to see. Obviously, this has to do with IoT devices and Azure. Would you say that they're using or creating a Linux embedded OS?
Not exactly. So this is only for, the Azure Sphere is only for security. So I think that's really important to note. So this is, and we're obviously going to talk about it later with Galen, but very broadly, it is a secured microcontroller. It is a secured OS layer that sits on top of that microcontroller and handles the back and forth between the MCU, and what is a secure cloud element. So the OS is really just handling the back and forth between the hardware and kind of the brains in the cloud. So what's happening here is the MCU has a lot of the elements that you would expect from, a trusted compute environment, secure boot, all of that. But what it also has is this certificate-based authentication that is going to communicate with the certificate granting in the cloud. And also in the cloud, what happens is there is threat detection. So when new viruses or vulnerabilities are detected, it's going to be able to basically detect those and then tell the chip and having a secure patching ability back down to the chip, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the product itself is the Azure Sphere, and then the cloud service that you mentioned about the security piece, that's the Azure Sphere security service in the cloud. So this solves a big problem that we have in IoT devices, which we're not always understanding if they're secure at all times, when they're not secure, and how to update the security on them has been a challenge. So this should help with that.
Yes, this gives you detection, audit. It gives you things like compartmentalization. There's a lot of things it gives you. Now, the issue here is Microsoft is doing this it's open sourcing this, so it's open. It's trying to work with all the chip vendors to get this on board. And will people take it? That's really the question. There's plenty of chip companies that have their own security standards, and in many ways, that's part of the problem. It's a very fragmented market. You'll never hear someone say, oh, the embedded market, it's just so uniform, because it's not. So this feels more in line with something like Samsung Arctic, which they have their secure modules. And I'm curious with Amazon could probably do something like this with the FreeRTOS if it wanted to overlay security into some of those things, right? So now they would have to do a deal also with with the chip vendors to have the hardware components. So that's a little like, would it? But this is a good model. It feels like a good model, and I am excited to see if it works. It's not retroactive though, so.
Right. You mentioned chip makers and trying to get them on board, and Microsoft already has MediaTek as one of the first companies to make these microcontroller units. You mentioned Arctic, and that's the one challenge that Samsung doesn't have to deal with because Samsung does make chips, or at least designs chips and has them produced. So in a sense, if they wanted to do something similar, they could without fearing chip makers aren't going to come on board.
Well, and they did. They just introduced, I think it was this year, their S modules, which stand for secure.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have the block diagrams for the MediaTek Azure Sphere. I know. Or the S modules. So I can't tell you exactly how these are different. I can go get the block diagrams possibly and come back to you on that. But yeah, so this is, we'll see.
Yeah.
It's an audacious play, but this is a big problem. So
right, and in theory, it solves a big problem. And I'm sure that our guest is going to get into the details even further. But one thing that's worth stressing right up front is Microsoft's handling the security aspect of this through Azure Sphere. But the data from the IoT device itself does not have to be sent to Microsoft Azure.
Yes, and we talk about all of that, and we even talk about when you'll see this and how even a little bit about how the chip is made. So stay tuned for Galen because he is worth it. Also, on the security front, we have the Online Trust Alliance, which, they do some cool stuff.
There's a ringing endorsement.
Well, they actually created, several years ago, they created a checklist for what to do when you move from your smart home. So how to de-authenticate all these devices.
I remember, yes.
So, I'm like, yeah. They've created an enterprise IoT security checklist. And this is it's similar. It's the best practices for things if you're going to have an IoT network in your office. And I'll link to it. I won't go into all, I think there's about 11 or 12 of these. But, some of them are really basic. You probably should have a guest network or a separate IoT network. Yay. You should update all your passwords and don't use products with hard-coded passwords. Yay. Some of the more interesting ones is don't allow or severely restrict automatic connections via Wi-Fi or other means. This will restrict the ability of other devices to connect and infiltrate an IoT device. I don't know. I was like, I feel like that kind of defeats the purpose of some of these IoT devices. I don't know. What do you think, Kevin?
Well, deployment of IoT devices is always a challenge. And yeah, you can take shortcuts to leave everything open and make it simpler to add them. But obviously, that's not a good security practice, so I get what they're saying there. And this is definitely geared towards enterprise as opposed to home, so I can understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, and they have things like cover up all microphones and cameras and things like that.
Or disable them if you're not going to use them even.
Yeah. So in my favorite one, which we should all do, although this puts the burden on the consumer, be it an enterprise or a consumer, is closely follow the life cycle of the devices so they can be removed from service when they are no longer updatable or secure. So, and this actually, I'll bring back the Microsoft thing because in my conversation with Galen Hunt, he mentioned that the MCUs are supported for a 10-year cycle. So I was thinking, so that means my washing machine stops being secure under Azure Sphere after 10 years, if it's included with this. But in the enterprise, you've got similar you've got similar gear that's going to be running around for 7 to 10 years is usually the longest I've seen in a lot of these connected devices in their support contracts. So
I think it's reasonable.
It's reasonable, but checking that and tracking that's
a challenge.
Yeah. So that is this. So click on that if you'd like to see what you should be doing. Skipping right along. In home security news, yay, a company called Nice out of Italy is buying a 75% stake in Abode, which is a home security system that I know lots of people love. The value of the 75% stake is $18.75 million. And this deal it's a good one. It fits with what we've been seeing with all the smart home security companies getting purchased by larger companies, such as Ring getting bought by Amazon or Blink getting bought by Amazon. Who else has not been bought by Amazon?
We actually did see the IOTA gateway from Abode at CES.
Oh, yeah, we talked about it.
We did. And they had planned to sell that for $329 and would ship in late Q1. Well, it's now early Q2, and now we've got news of this acquisition, but no updates on that gateway. So we'll have to see. That's a HomeKit compatible gateway, in fact.
Right. It turns your Abode system into something compatible with HomeKit. And if you don't have an existing Abode system, you can buy that and add Abode pieces on, and then you have a security system. Yay!
Yep. Supposed to work with Nest, Ecobee, Philips Hue, and LifeX right out of the box. So we'll see what happens if and when that shows up.
All right. Also, in acquisition news, Lutron, the maker of my favorite light switches, has bought Ketra, which is actually an Austin-based company that makes really fancy high-end commercial lighting. Ketra is a company that was actually created by Nav Such, who was one of the founders of Silicon Labs. So old school Austin guy here in the chip world. The cool thing about Ketra's technology is they make the LED chips that are in their bulbs. So this actually gives Lutron now this kind of like crazy, if they want to do it, I'll say it, end-to-end, lighting kind of company. So they can make the chips that make LEDs, the bulbs, and then the radio protocols that allow them all to talk to each other. And Ketra's unique because the chips actually can tune themselves. So they can tune themselves to the right color that the company or the resident wants, and they will always stay that color. So apparently LEDs can pop in and out of tune, as it were. And this apparently makes it not happen.
So do you think Lutron wants to actually get into the bulb business? Because this is a very unique technology in LED.
I think... So I have been to Ketra's demo room, and Ketra's lights are in like the Museum of Modern Art in Chicago and some very fancy high-end places, a lot of nice retail stores. I think this gets Lutron into the commercial lighting space more so than maybe the
very crowded home market.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I think this is a smart move for them because Lutron really, they know what they're doing in terms of like lighting. And I think bringing their expertise from the consumer world and the high-end home and dealer world, which is where they started, I think this is really good for them. It broadens their market. It puts them in competition with, I guess, Philips and other big Osram, but I think it's a smart move for beautiful lights I think they'll be the high-end beautiful lighting company.
Right. Makes sense.
So no word on how much this cost. So sad to hear that. And I don't know if actually Lutron will suddenly have an outpost in Austin, which would be super cool for me.
Right in your backyard.
Right in my backyard. Although Lutron is right in your backyard.
This is true.
So, all right. That is, let's see. Oh, in our rumored acquisition category, we have Google being touted as someone who might acquire Nokia's health division, which we all know and love, or used to know and love as Withings. So this is a little convoluted, but Nokia bought Withings. Now in February of this year, they were like, you know what? This isn't for us. Kevin read a lovely memo to that effect.
Yes, the internal memo explained how the digital health business did not look like it was going to be profitable for the company, and they were evaluating what to do. Basically, this was back in February. I forget the quote, something about failing fast isn't failure, it's accelerated learning, is what they said. I'm going to go with failing fast because Nokia bought Withings for $190 million in 2016, and I suspect whoever gets this part of their business, it's going to be a lot less, like a lot. Google makes sense to me only because A, it has the money, B, it could tie into their Nest and their hardware teams, but also because, and this is just my experience, and I've tried this several times over the past several years, Google is not that great with health data. Google Fit in particular has just been wonky for me, does not work well, has not synced with other services, so maybe Withings IP can come in there and address that. I don't know. I'm hoping. So it makes sense from that perspective to me. I don't know if it's going to happen, obviously.
Right. I think they also floated Amazon as a possible acquirer, which would be interesting because Amazon has launched that health initiative with JP Morgan and is it Berkshire Hathaway, I believe, that we don't actually know what the heck that is. But, let's just throw them in there too. So in small news, we have August adding Apple Watch door unlock support.
Yeah, if you have an Apple Watch like I do, although I don't have an August lock, you can update your app and now just tap on your watch to unlock the door. Keep in mind, I know that August has technology where you can just walk up to your door and have it unlock when you have your phone with you. This does not do that. I think that's called Smart Unlock. This is not that. This is actually just tapping on the watch in the app to unlock your door. So just want to be clear about that.
So you would have to tap on the watch to activate the apps, go into the app, and then tap.
Yeah, but keep in mind you can set complications on an Apple Watch to be shortcuts to apps or show data. So one tap to open up an app or two taps to open up an app is pretty quick on the most current Apple Watch. You're not waiting for 5 seconds.
Okay. Also, in other little news, we have Twilio it's now generally available, so it's not exactly a new program. They call it Programmable Wireless. Basically, this is the ability to have a Twilio access to any of your connected devices.
Right. And with a SIM card, they'll actually provide SIM cards and service, and they have pricing plans that are, I think, pretty reasonable. If you have, maybe you want to create your own little IoT sensor that connects to the web or something for whatever reason, and it's remote, you can pop a SIM in there and, have text messages sent to your phone or whatnot. I think it's more for people who are do-it-yourselfers, number one, but there have been some companies that are using this. They mention in their blog posts, iBit, Eat-a-Bit, and Not a Bit. No, just kidding. Dwello, which is a cellular connected smart hub for apartment buildings. But even the folks over at Raven, I had just reviewed the Raven connected dashboard camera. They talked about using Twilio's programmable wireless. So it's an easy way to get cellular connectivity to IoT devices.
Right. And Kevin has a brilliant idea that maybe we'll send him a Twilio SIM.
What, my mailbox idea?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, real quick. I mean, we've got, 55 people living in this community, and we have a whole bunch of mailboxes all together at the front of the community. We never know when the mail's here because nobody's coming to the house. So I'd like to put a sensor in there and then have it send me a text message saying your mail's here. Well, we could all do it if people wanted it in my neighborhood, but I would probably use this tool.
So there you go. If it happens, I'm sure Kevin will tell you about it, because it'd be cool.
I'm going to patent it and sell it to the post office.
There you go. All right. Oh, also, now you can test drive VMware's IoT products.
Yeah, this is interesting. I haven't taken it for a test drive, but this is their VMware Pulse IoT Center. They have a couple of hands-on labs where you can actually remotely access a test environment. So you can explore the Pulse IoT Center consoles, dashboards. You can manage simulated IoT environments. So this is a way for them to educate people on their product, to manage devices. I mean, it's free to access the lab, so I may run through these things. I thought it was kind of cool to tinker around with.
Tinker. And since summer is coming, Kevin also found the video is cheesy. Well, I'm sure we'll link to it. I was like, we added IoT and thus your pet is safe. So this is how to transport your pet safely? Maybe?
Yeah, safely. Right. It'll actually help you if let's say you're moving across the country and you were going to take your pet on the plane, and unfortunately, I didn't think airlines still did this, but put your pet in the cargo area, or you're going to have a transportation service take your pet. Well, DigiPet, for example, is a company that uses this technology, which comes from Unisys, and they use RFID tag tracking and an app to basically monitor where your pet is,
temperature.
Yeah, a whole bunch of things. They can even help you with booking pet shipments, which I'm like, that's really smart because they can even make money, a small cut on that. So that's great for the business model. Not everybody transports their pets, but I just thought it was a cool use of IoT.
Yeah, when you're traveling for the summer, sometimes it's nice, bring your dog with you, bring your cat with you. So I liked it. If I use it, I'll let you guys know how I found it. All right. And Kevin, this week you reviewed HomeKit sensors from Fabaro.
Yeah.
What's your verdict?
It was time to look at HomeKit stuff since I just moved everything over to SmartThings. So I have the $60 Fabaro door window sensor and the $70 Fabaro motion sensor, the eyeball, as I like to call it. The verdict is they're pricey, but they're very well designed. They are very responsive, easy to set up in the Home app for iOS for automations. I have the door window sensor on my home office door, and literally from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. when I'm in the office and I shut the door, the light just comes on. When I open the door to leave, the light goes off. Obviously, you can use that for security as well. Very configurable. I'm a little concerned about the batteries only because they're not standard like AA, AAA kind of batteries. They're sort of unique, but Fabaro says they should last 2 years. So if that's the case, then it's less of an issue. But I mean, you pay a premium for good design, well-working sensors that don't just do what they claim to do. The motion sensor and the door window sensor also report temperature, which is handy. And the motion sensor can tell you the brightness of a room in terms of lux. So you might even be able to make some custom automations based on room brightness.
That would be interesting. Like open my shades, my
Exactly.
HomeKit-enabled shades. And I believe you actually, if you wanted to do something like that, and you can see the lux on the Home app in HomeKit.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, then you could do that with Lutron, Serena shades. And I think Hunter Douglas also has a shade that works with HomeKit. So if you're eager to try something like that out, which I would be, that's actually kind of cool.
I think so too.
Mm-hmm. All right. Or you could do it based on temperature, actually. If it gets too hot, just bring the shades down.
Bring the shades down. Yep.
All right. Well, now it is time for our IoT podcast listener hotline. So a note on this. We would like to thank Schlage for sponsoring our hotline for the last 5 months. That sponsorship is now becoming available. So if any of you out there would like to sponsor the listener hotline, please reach out to Andrew at iotpodcast.com. But for the time being, this week's IoT Podcast Listener Hotline is brought to you by Schlage, maker of electronic locks. Schlage smart locks work with most smart home and security systems, so you can get the most out of your lock, whether you're an Apple HomeKit user or you just love Amazon's Echo. To see what's possible, visit Schlage.com to learn more. All right, this week's hotline question comes to us from Scott.
Hello, my name is Scott. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and I've only been listening to your show for a couple weeks now, but I'm into the home automation, so I love your show. But what I'm wondering is there a video doorbell system that will be good for someone in an apartment building who does not have the ability to use a wired system since there is no existing wired doorbell system? Thank you for your time.
Okay, Scott. I wish this were a longer answer because, then you'd have a lot of choice. But there's really only one choice out there for battery-powered doorbells today. I'm going to recommend you don't go and buy kind of some of the no-name brands on Amazon, which are out there, but don't do it. A lot of them fall apart. They're pretty janky. They have terrible apps. So your options are really Ring. Ring the original for $100 or the Ring Video Doorbell 2 for $200. And the video, so what that price differential gets you is a slightly different camera on the Video Doorbell 2. It doesn't have as wide a field of view, but it is a higher resolution camera. The other thing is the battery pack for that one is rechargeable. So you just take it out and you can actually buy an extra battery pack if you want, just like alternate them. So some people find that way more convenient. The battery on the original Video Doorbell is also rechargeable, but you have to take the whole thing off to recharge it. So it's a little less convenient.
Yeah. And if you're not in a rush, Scott, I would consider waiting to see when the Blink Video Doorbell arrives. It was coming out in 2018, we last heard. It still says coming soon on their site. Blink was purchased by Amazon, so I don't know if there's any changes, but that will also be a battery-powered option. I know they announced a price previously, but now there's no price listed on the site, so I'm not even going to hazard a guess. That may change.
So there you go. If you can wait, wait. If you really want one right now and you don't mind a little inconvenience, go with the $100 one and you can always swap it out later. So there you go. Also, in installing my Nest Hello doorbell, speaking of doorbells, I found it difficult because it just was not connecting. I had the darndest time connecting my Android phone to this thing, which frustrated me. We did get someone who called us and said, hey, I get that problem sometimes too. And what I do is I turn off my mobile data. And to that person, I say, you are so right. That is exactly what you do when you have an Android phone that is not connecting to your device. You turn off mobile data, and usually that actually forces things to go over Wi-Fi, and it's much smoother. But
I would also say even with iOS, because when I had problems with my Ring, that's what they had suggested originally.
Oh, well, there you go. But in the case of the Nest, I did do that, and it did not help. But other people have said that they installed it on an Android phone with no problems, so I am just a special snowflake, which does not surprise me at all. Okay, Oh, final thing. If you want to call in to the Internet of Things hotline, please dial 512-623-7424 and leave us your question. And now, because I'm feeling like I'm cleaning out my junk closet, if you send me, or if you guys call and leave a message, you will be registered to win my old Netatmo welcome camera. Dun, dun, dun. This is a lovely camera. It's got an SD card for those of you guys who don't want to send your stuff to the cloud. There's even some sensors that you can actually connect to it, and you can have the camera go on when the sensors go on or off, or however you want to set it up. So that is old gear that you can win. Yay! And now, stay tuned for our guest, Galen Hunt, who is going to deep dive into Azure Sphere. Hey everyone, we are taking a break from this week's Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week we have Ben Goodman, VP of Strategy and Innovation at ForgeRock. So let's remind our listeners, what is ForgeRock?
ForgeRock is a digital identity company. Our scale and flexibility lets our customers move beyond traditional enterprise identity use cases. And typically people use identity management tools for things like provisioning employees access to corporate applications. But we like to do a lot more. But we also do things like the authentication and security for your bank or cellular network or for connected cars or even things like connected basketball. People are doing really cool things when it comes to digital transformation by leveraging ForgeRock's technology.
Okay, and one of the challenges with identity management today is that it's applied to so many things, or maybe it should be applied to so many things. How are you guys looking at that market?
Well, it's a great point. There's this rush right now to get technology to market. And I think as technology just keeps moving faster and faster, the reality is that security and identity is often an afterthought. You hear these stories about, hey, we have a jet engine and it has thousands of sensors on it and we're going to collect all this data from it. And they start with something like that and they don't think about, okay, how am I going to secure that data? How am I going to secure that thing? And what we're also seeing is that, the government and the regulatory climate can't really keep up as well. And so you see things like in Europe, they have GDPR, which is the privacy regulation there. And, it's probably years too late, yet it's ahead of pretty much where anyone else in the world is.
So how does identity management actually help with this issue?
Identity, if used properly, is like magic. It's one of the few technologies that can actually improve customer experience while actually making their interaction more secure. So identity is also one of the few technologies that is future-proof. The reality is, in order to secure something, you must identify it first. And if you think about it, no matter what the device is, identity persists. You always are who you are, and your thing always is who it is.
And so are people realizing this and building their products with that in mind?
I think this whole concept of identity and security being an afterthought is starting to change. And quite frankly, it has to. We're working with consumer electronics companies who are now thinking about how they create an end-to-end identity-driven customer experience. So from when you order it to when you put it on the first time, they provide a better customer experience, but they also make the device more secure. We're working with large industrials that are building command and control IoT networks, but they're making sure that since inception, that they ensure that everything is secured all the way from the chip to the cloud.
Sounds good. So where can we go to find out more?
So to learn more about what you can do with digital identity and what our customers are doing with identity, visit www.forgerock.com/digital-identity.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Galen Hunt, who is with Microsoft. Hey, Galen, how are you doing?
Good. Great. Great to be here.
All right. You guys are at RSA, where Microsoft just announced a pretty big product, Azure Sphere. And this feels like something that's been coming for a while because we talked last April about some of the core ingredients behind this. So we'll get into some of that. But let's first, what is Azure Sphere?
Azure Sphere is an end-to-end solution for device manufacturers who build MCU microcontroller-based devices. It allows them to build devices that are connected to the internet and highly secured. You might ask me what's an MCU or what kind of devices use those. And these MCUs are everywhere. They're in everything from toys to home appliances to industrial and manufacturing equipment. And basically none of them are connected yet to the internet. We see this huge transition with IoT over the next couple of years of all of these devices becoming connected.
All right. So yes, Galen, as you might imagine, is correct. Guys out there, when we talk about computing, we're usually talking about big, beefy processors in your phone or your computer. What we're talking about with microcontrollers are all I think of them as the ARM M-class devices, although there are plenty of others. These are the things in your wearables, things in your washing machine. And yes, they are getting connected to the internet. So you guys have created a secured MCU. There's also a secure OS and a secure cloud component. So the idea is that this microcontroller, well, actually, you should explain the idea to us. So what is happening and why do we need all these three components?
Well, if you remember back when we talked back in April, Stacy, we talked about the 7 properties of highly secure devices. And that was a paper that we wrote and released a year ago. And basically, we looked at, from our experience at Microsoft, building devices, what is necessary to build an IoT device, standalone, out on the internet device that is highly secured. To address those 7 properties, you need 3 pieces. You need hardware support, you need software support on the device, and you need collaboration with a cloud to help keep those devices secure. And that's what we've built as we built Azure Sphere, are these 3 elements. So there's a new class of MCU that we call an Azure Sphere certified MCU. These will be built by our silicon partners. So Microsoft is not getting in the business of building our own and selling chips. We do, however, have what we call a silicon IP block. So we have Microsoft security technology that we've developed that we put into every single one of these Azure Sphere certified chips. And that gives a hardware rooted trust. And the second element is the Azure Sphere operating system. It's a defense in depth multi-layer operating system that creates a very secure environment on the hardware for the software. And then the third aspect is the Azure Sphere Security Service. And the Security Service does 3 things. It brokers trust between Azure Sphere devices and other devices and the cloud. It monitors for emerging and detects emerging security threats against the devices across the entire ecosystem. And it renews the security on the devices through software update as new security challenges come out.
Okay. And when you talked about threat detection and then renewing security on the chip, what's happening there?
Well, okay, so let's talk about security renewals. What we mean by that is software update. When a device is out there and some new security threat emerges, or maybe even someone finds a bug in some piece of code that's on the device, you want to be able to create a patch for that and get it out onto those devices, do it reliably, do it dependably, and know that every device that you build it out in the field is now running the latest software as it connects to the internet and to the cloud. So the Azure Sphere Security Service provides the update capabilities for these devices.
Does it also do things like signed updates, signed patches? Does it check for that?
It's all absolutely signed, yes. So it leverages on top of the certificates and the signing. I'll just talk about one of the security vulnerabilities that we found in Microsoft experiences. For example, let's say you have version 1 of your software is out running on the device and you figure out there's some security vulnerability. So you put a version 2, the manufacturer puts out a version 2. Well, hackers will try to trick the device into, instead of running version 2, to roll back to version 1 with the known vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things built into the chips is rollback protection. We have a way that we can physically modify by blowing some fuses in the chip to say, hey, don't ever run version 1 ever again. It's got a vulnerability.
Wow. So it's got its own self-destruct button for elements of the chip.
For a particular version of software, yeah.
You guys originally worked with MediaTek on this hardware. How can other companies become hardware partners, or is that part of this?
So we have a program working with as many silicon partners as we're basically trying to engage as many as we can. We have over a dozen companies we're working with right now, MediaTek being the first partner, the first one that's coming to the market. And what we do is we go out and we are licensing royalty-free our security technology for the chips. And that's so that these vendors can use it. You know, the MCU market's very different from like the PC market in the regard of, in the PC market, you have 2, maybe depending on how you count it, 3 silicon providers for the processors. In the MCU market, there's dozens of silicon providers. And so in order to provide depth and breadth and get a solution out that it's capable of being in every device, we realized we were going to have to license this IP and make it very readily accessible. So if a partner will work with us, we give them what's called an IP block that goes into their device. We give them the support to teach them how to use that appropriately in their chip. And we also work with them to validate that they put it in right and put the rest of the architecture of the chip correctly together so that it really is secured. And then we certify it and we let them put the Azure Sphere brand on that chip.
Now, how does this compare with something like ARM has their Trust Zone that they recently extended to MCUs? There's NXP has, I can never remember what their secure module stuff is called, for their Kinetis line. So in the MCU world, everybody right now has, as you said, rolled their own. So how does this compare or coexist with that?
Ours is a solution that we have built based on the learnings of 15 years of security in the Xbox game console. In that game console business, Microsoft's gone through 3 generations of those consoles, invested significant amounts of money in the security of those consoles, primarily to prevent piracy. But in the process of doing that, we've learned a lot about what determined hackers will do, how far they will go, and what kind of defense mechanisms we need in place. And then we took that learnings and created this IP block that we are using. I think one of the things that stands out compared to some other solutions is that, it really is based on this many, many years of experience dealing with very persistent, very determined hackers. I guess another way to describe it is built to function with the Azure Sphere operating system and the Azure Sphere security service. So we kind of optimize the entire system end to end so that all the pieces work together perfectly together.
Okay. So if I'm a customer and I'm like, hey, this sounds awesome. I totally want to go and get these MCUs, put them in my devices and never worry about security again. Does that mean that if I buy this, does that mean all of my data that these chips are generating gets sent to the Azure IoT cloud eventually? Or could I use another or keep it on premise?
That's a great question. As I mentioned before, we're really committed to openness and the breadth of the platform here. Azure Sphere secures your communication, but we don't actually hold your data in Azure Sphere. You connect to whatever cloud service that you want to. So if you say you're running proprietary servers on premise in your enterprise, well, you connect to them, or you connect to AWS or Google or IBM or Azure IoT Hub, for example, and Azure IoT Central and those features. Obviously, we want to make it as easy as possible for people to use Azure and created a fantastic, very easy to use, low barrier to entry way for people to use Azure Cloud services for their data if they want to, but we don't lock them in.
Let's talk about Azure Sphere. Would I buy it from you guys? Would I buy the chip and then would I license the back and forth from the chip to the cloud security element?
So the way you would purchase Azure Sphere is you would go to your distributor and you'd buy an Azure Sphere certified chip, and with it would come bundled the license for the Azure Sphere operating system. So the operating system come pre-installed on the chip, and the rights to use the Azure Sphere security service for a 10-year lifetime of the device. And it's a one-time transaction. One time, you pay one cost, you get the chip, you get the operating system, and you get the security service and the ongoing services for that for the 10-year lifetime.
Okay. So let's talk now about big macro IoT things and how this kind of fits into that. One of the big things that we talk about a lot is this, oh my gosh, are we going to do everything in the cloud? Are we going to do everything at the edge? And, it's probably going to be a bit of both, depending on your use case. This feels like a very cloud-centric model because I am sending my data from the secure MCU up to the cloud security kind of element. How might I build this to work in more of a distributed environment that may not have always on or even reliable connectivity? Does that break this model?
We see the cloud as a very important element. We see the edge as a very important element. You'll hear Microsoft messaging. We talk about the intelligent cloud and the intelligent edge. So, for example, we have a product called Azure IoT Edge that allows you to take computation that you would normally run in the cloud and bring it down locally into your environment and package it that it runs there. Like, so for example, if you have a container ship that's offline for weeks at a time, or you're in a factory, you don't want to have to shut down your product line just because you lost your internet connection for a few hours, right? And so we have the capability of bringing this computation very, very locally as well.
Am I correct in understanding that this will work with Azure IoT Edge?
Yes, absolutely.
And would it work with some other edge computing platform if I'm not using IoT Edge?
It could be made to work with another platform. The way to kind of think about it, at the bottom, we've got a chip and we've got an operating system, and we provide an API for programming those chips and for giving you internet connections or TCP/IP connections, TLS connections. And so the programmers who program the actual device, they're open to program execution that's totally local to the device. They're open to be able to talk to whatever local devices or other things in the environment as well.
Okay. And why is Microsoft doing this? Obviously we hear a lot about IoT security. Why enter here with what is a hardware platform and a Linux distro, which is kind of crazy for you guys?
Well, I'll put it away. We participate in the IT ecosystem, right? And if you think about, step back and think about this MCU ecosystem. There's going to be billions of these devices coming online. And we look at it and kind of say the technologies that people are using right now, pre-Azure Sphere, those devices are not going to be secure. They're going to be a security nightmare. And we looked at it, I started this project about 4 years ago, looking at that ecosystem and seeing this future that looked like a very scary future and saying, we have the technology. We have a lot of experience. We could, in fact, almost started as a research question. Could we take everything that we've learned at Microsoft about security and figure out how to package it in such a way that it could be used on these very, very small devices so that we lived in a secure world? And that's what we created with Azure Sphere. And I put it this way, I will actually often, when I'm talking to customers, say, there's kind of Microsoft's reason for doing Azure Sphere and there's Galen's reason for doing Azure Sphere. Galen's reason is Galen wants to live in a secure world. I want to live in a secure world, and the security that's out there for MCUs isn't good enough yet. And so we're bringing the technologies to make those devices secure. Now, from Microsoft's, ultimately a corporation, we have responsibility as shareholders. What we see is if there are many of these devices and they are secure and people trust them, they'll deploy them in lots of places and they will be part of cloud solutions and they will use cloud services. And, one of the predominant ones we anticipate many of them will use are all of the Azure services. And so we see tremendous economic benefits from there.
Okay. So one of the things that you've cited several times in relation to the creation of this is your 7 properties of highly secure devices. Just briefly, let's run through those for people.
Okay, so the 7 properties are first a hardware root of trust, then defense in depth, a small PCB, a trusted computing base, dynamic compartments, certificate-based authentication, online error reporting, and renewable security.
Yes. Okay. So let's just dig into a couple of those that people might be like, what? So like compartmentalization, what does that mean?
Okay, I love this one. So compartmentalization is actually probably almost one of the oldest security technologies known to man. And this is the idea of having multiple layers of defense and having separation of concerns. For example, I'll give you an example. In a ship, ships are compartmentalized with floodgates so that if one part of the ship there's a leak, that doesn't just fill up the entire ship, for example. We use it in buildings where we have firewalls inside of buildings so that if there's a fire, there's barriers to prevent it from propagating through the entire building. And then it goes back to, ancient castles and things. If you think about on a chip, one of the most important lessons we've learned at Microsoft about security over the last 20 years is that it isn't a matter of if I will get hacked. You will get hacked. Your device, some version of your device will get hacked at some time. And the question is, when your device gets hacked, what are the mitigations and how prepared are you for that? And so building compartments actually into the chip itself and into the operating system allows us to, if part of the chip becomes compromised in some way, that compromise is compartmentalized. It can't go any further. And then we can use the rest of the chip and the rest of the operating system and the software to be able to restore the security of that piece. I'll even go a little bit farther because one of the questions you might ask is these chips are different than traditional MCUs. We brought in a Cortex-A class processor in addition to the Cortex-M class processor on these MCUs for the very first time. You might ask, well, why did you do that? And the reason why is because it gives us dynamic compartments. So traditional MCUs have static compartments. They'll have like maybe a trust zone and then one other layer. So they only have like really 2 compartments on the chip. And so you can't change the compartments like after you've been out in deployment. If you figure out that you've got some new security vulnerability or some new form of attack, like let's say a device has been out in the field for 5 years and some new security attack is invented, we can actually go change the compartmentalization in the device 5 years after it's out in the field and mitigate again and prevent that attack from being used.
Wow, that sounds awesome. But it also brings up, these are not chips then for battery-powered devices? This sounds like something that's going to consume more power with an A-class chip.
Well, one of the innovations that we did, so we partnered very early with ARM on building these chips. They're one of our silicon partners, and figured out how to, with their help, to construct an A-class processor that is much lower power and much smaller area than people traditionally associate with the Cortex A-class core. And so we will see battery-powered Azure Sphere chips.
All of this sounds really intriguing. My biggest question then would be, this is for going forward. Is there a way to retrofit some of this for all of the millions or hundreds of millions of connected devices that are already out on the market?
Well, it turns out in the MCU space, there aren't that many devices that are already connected out there. And so we're at this perfect timing bringing out Azure Sphere where we kind of can fix the problems before they can become problems. So we're really trying to address all of the new devices as they become created and become connected. It's like right now, every appliance in your kitchen isn't connected yet.
Oh, Galen,
they're going to be.
You have not been to my house.
I haven't been to your kitchen, have I? Oh, yeah, good point.
But okay, going forward. And these will be out in the market, like physical devices that one can buy. They'll be on the market when?
The first Azure Sphere certified chips will be available in volume this summer. And we expect to see the very first Azure Sphere based products devices on shelf by the end of the year.
All right, everyone, for Christmas, this is what I'm getting. All right, Galen, thank you so much for coming on the show this week.
Oh, thank you, Stacey. It's been fantastic.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.